So thank you for joining us today. And it's a good morning to people on the East Coast and good evening for people I know who are not on the East Coast. Today we're going to take a quick tour of Indigo Studio. And I want to do it's basically two parts to the story. One is just trying to set the stage for prototyping. And then I will talk about what Indigo actually does for you as part of the prototype, right? So I'm George Abraham. I am an interaction design manager here at Intrologistics. I help make Indigo Studio. I also help manage the interaction design activities for a lot of the Introgistics products, the developer products, and so on and so forth. All right. So if you are from the user experience discipline or whether you're not, the the truth of the matter is we have a mountain of methods available. So if you're new to experience, it looks like a tremendous thing you need to learn and to master. And if you're an expert, you look at this mountain and say, wow, I have an awesome toolkit and I get to pick and choose whatever I need. But the what one thing which is shared across all these methods and why interaction design does things the way they do, it boils down to evaluation. Without evaluation, there's actually not much of interaction design. It's just what the designer thinks and what they implement. But that's not the way we want to really do it. So when we talk about evaluation, there's a specific nuance to it, which is absolutely critical. And that nuance is that we want to say evaluation of the design in use with users in the right context. And some of you are already familiar with these concepts, so I'm not going to talk about it too much. All I would say is that just by looking at a design, especially designs which are applications, things which need to be used, there is very little chance that somebody can guess whether it's going to be usable or useful. You have to use it. That's simple as that. So, do you speak user experience? Now, that's an interesting question, right? Because as a discipline, whether you're talking to designers or not, we have created a big arsenal of terms and terminology which we kind of throw around for style. So, for example, words like interaction framework or patterns. I mean, these sound like big words. But if I look at the iceberg metaphor, all these terms and all these jargon we have created, which serve as good communication aids between designers and people who are involved in the design process, the part the user actually cares about or can actually give you feedback on is actually a very tiny bit. And that's what we can actually get feedback on. And my argument is that that small, tiny piece are prototypes. There is also an interesting tension in our discipline is who are we creating deliverables for? And that brings about the question, is it for the user or is it for the client? The word deliverables always tries to push us towards clients. So in the past, maybe you have done it. Definitely have done it. We come up with this fancy term, wireframes, and you have wireframes of different kinds. In one way, you have wireframes shown on the left, which is showing a sort of flow, and there's a lot of annotations on it. Then on the right, it's showing the basic screen, and then around it, there are a lot of notes and also micro bits of functionality. And basically, we're trying to communicate with the notes that when the person actually clicks on the event, this will happen, the menu will slide up. A lot of information is being communicated here. Unfortunately, I can't evaluate this with users. I don't know if you have tried it, but I can guarantee you I will not present this to the user. But maybe you have matured and your annotations are much more nicer to look at. You know, there's a Zen thing going on there. You have the nice wireframe on the left, right here, if you can see my mouse cursor. And you have placed these nice, elegant callouts, and all your annotations are nicely tidied up on the right side. But here's the problem: these kind of annotated wireframes are well-meaning documents created by well-meaning designers, and their intent was always to communicate how the design experience should be. Wireframes are also incredibly document friendly, and when I say document friendly, you can print that out, make it a nice tidy pile, get it signed off, archive it, store it, and all that jazz. It looks incredibly well organized. It looks like you have actually done some work. um, And more importantly, it also serves as a visual reference. When you're having communications and conversations, you have something to look at and talk about. But the point I wanted to make was, when you add annotations and callouts, it draws artificial attention to certain elements of the interface. It's like, hey, look at me. You put up the wireframe and everybody's looking around the annotations. And that is very distracting to what you're actually trying to evaluate, which is the task. It is difficult to evaluate because I cannot have a good discussion with annotations screaming at me, and focus the people on the task at hand. And the worst offender is that it creates this, what I call toxic annotations, because inadvertently, the user, when the designer created it, they can see all the screen states. And in their head, it looks perfect. But when the user actually experiences this particular wireframe or prototype, they only see it one screen at a time. Because you added annotations, you think you have designed things well, but you haven't, because you have forgotten to do it because you put it in the annotations. Users never see these annotations, so they are kind of left in the blank. So eventually, what happens is people fall through the cracks, and as simple as that. The second point you have to wonder about annotations is that watching something and experiencing it are two different things. You can have a presentation where you are the designer and you're presenting your wireframes to a focus group or something. You would explain it so well that it makes great sense to the focus group. And then you build it and put the same thing in the hands of the people to use it in their own time, in their own task. And suddenly it's a completely different experience. So the goal is to do less of presenting or documenting, but and more of experiencing and actually putting it with the user, evaluating it in use and in the right context. How am I doing? Everybody can. I'm viewing four panel. Is there a lag? Okay. Oh, no, not both screens. My apologies. Is it better now? I hope so. I'm sorry about that. Looks like it was on the wrong screen. So as I was saying, it's less about presenting and more about experiencing it with users. And when we talk about experiences, I have to point out that the way I look at it is experiencing comes hand in hand with stories of use. And these stories actually come from research. It's not something which I have made up. And what they really do is that stories, in my mind, capture real life. And real life tends to be very messy. It's not as tidy as we conceive of it inside our applications. Stories also have this fascinating ability to be linear, as in, there are actually no decision points you have to make in a story. If I'm going to narrate a story to you, it is almost priming you to progress to the next step of the story. Stories also have this amazing ability to be shareable. And when you share a story, it actually triggers people to come up with better stories or newer stories. And that's actually an excellent thing in terms of a product meeting. And most importantly, it really helps guide the prototyping and the evaluation effort. And that's what I'm going to talk about in the next section, where I show you how stories could be used. Uh, and what I really wanted to communicate was that I have argued till now to think about wireframes a slightly differently, maybe in a little negative light. Pardon me for that. But I'm going to walk you through how I can wean you away from thinking about it as wireframes first, but as flows, sketches, prototypes, and maybe wireframes can come out of that exercise. So let me just switch over, because the next part of the presentation, I kind of did it inside Indigo, because there were certain things I wanted to communicate and it helped do it better. So let me do that. Escape. All right. So are you seeing the screen with the dots on it? All right. Cool. So let's go back to what I was trying to say about stories. So, one way I think about application design or interaction design is that I have user who is on the extreme left of this particular screen, and there are these stars. Of course, goals are always stars. They're on the extreme right of the screen. And then in between that, there are these various dots. And there are two kinds of dots, and I'll talk about it soon. But what really I expect a user to do is that in order for the user to progress towards that goal, they have to maybe do a set of tasks and actions in a certain sequence. And I call that a sequence A. The user may also can do the same goal in a slightly different way, and I called it B. And now I want to point out what the differences between those two circles are. When I talk about tasks and actions, I'm talking about it more holistically. And when I say holistically, there are things I know that the app will not do, and there are things I know the app will do. Understanding that difference as to where that handover takes place between the app and the real world context is essential for understanding the scope of the system. And some of you might have already been familiar with this notion of use case diagrams, right? And you talk about system boundary, and those things are still important constructs. And you can talk about the same construct within the context of interaction design, where the white circles are not things the user is going to do in the app, or the blue circles are the ones the user will do in the app. And then you can talk about additional storylines, which is the story C, where the user does it in a certain way and approaches a completely different goal, right? So now that we are talking about systems, let's make it more rigid because I always see systems as rigid. There you go. So now I have a clean flow where both A and B have a branch, and that's a sequence a user can take in towards their goal. And now let's talk about wireframes. See, I told you I'll talk about wireframes. But I think about wireframes slightly differently. I think of it as sketches. And now that I have planned out this flow, I have understood how the user progresses, from the first point to the last point where the goal is. I now have identified some critical points in this application, which I can start thinking about sketching first. So, for example, the entry point for the sequence A and B are both the same. So that's clearly a very important thing I can start sketching. Right here, there is another branch. I'll sketch that. Now there are exit screens. So as you see, I'm designing literally from the outside in. But the problem which happens with traditional wireframing approaches when it's not done within the context of a flow is this, right? You end up creating these two sketches, and then there are things user has to do in between before they can get to the last point, and that you just imagine the user is going to do XYZ. But that's not what interaction design is about. Interaction design is as much about designing the gaps as much as the screen itself. So, what we should really be striving to do is design those states so that now you have the complete flow. And once you have the sketches done and they interact with each other based on what the user does, you have a prototype, right? And that's how I'm defining it. You have a prototype, which means it is a story A. You have drawings in it, you have interactions in it, and animations, especially because there are certain kinds of feedback which has to take place, which is best communicated with animation. Let's put it that way. Right? So that's what Indigo is all kind of about, right? We kind of try to bring together three critical elements. There's a drawing aspect, then you have the interaction aspect, and the transition aspect. But what we have tried to hope to excel at is make a perfect fusion of these three things. What that actually means is that we are not a full blown Photoshop. Neither are we a full blown Final Cut Pro, nor are we a full blown JavaScript framework. What we have is the right mix with the right level of complexity such that these three things can coexist. And not only coexist within the context of a user story. Right? And your prototype can have not only one story, it can have four stories, but that's okay. But each story is making a progression toward a specific goal. So how does Indigo do things differently? What is the big shebang about Indigo? Some of you have used prototyping tools of various kinds, right? And in general, and I'm trying to distill the essence of how those tools kind of work. And maybe if I'm wrong, you can raise your questions and let's follow it then. So I'm going to design this shopping cart experience, right? And there are some products laid out, and there's a shopping cart, and I want the whole experience to be when person adds to shopping cart shows items and so on and so forth. So for that, I fire up my tool of choice and I design my first screen. And that's what this is. I'm trying to show it as a tab. This is screen one. You design this first screen. Now you want to show the next thing which happens in the flow. For that, you create another screen. And in that screen, you make changes to it. You make it green, and now your shopping cart shows one item. You go ahead, add another screen. In this case, the second item got a green highlight, and the shopping cart shows two items. Now you want to view the shopping cart. For that, you create another screen. You design that particular screen, and now you want to check out. You create another screen, and it shows you the checkout screen. But there is a slight problem in here. The problem is, despite your best intentions, what you ended up with are six screens. They're completely disconnected to each other. And if you have been like in this wireframe production mode, you have this bunch of screens which you now have to figure out, okay, which are the ones I need, as I point out here, screens I need for the story, right? So now you go about, okay, from screen one, on click, it goes to screen two. Then from screen two, on click, it goes to screen three. Then from screen three, you get the picture, right? You go to screen four. Now this, what I call this an interactions, I'll do it later approach. It breaks the story of use. And if you guys are ever familiar with quilting, that's what it just feels like. And that's not the kind of experience we want. We want the designer to stay focused on the story at hand. So what we want is a seamless operation. And this is how Indigo handles the same situation slightly differently. And I'm introducing this notion of screen states. And don't worry about it if it doesn't make perfect sense, because I'll actually show you exactly how I made this kind of this shopping cart experience. So in using screen states, what it does, it cleans it up. What we do is that instead of having separate screens, some of them become states of so-called the product page, and some of them become the states of a checkout screen. Now, remember what I was talking about the flow? Is that you have a sketch, and then I want you to think about the next sketch, then the next sketch, and the next sketch. That's how Indigo would do it. You design the first screen. Excuse me. I'm gonna have a sip of water. So you design the first screen, and then from there, Indigo helps you create the second state of that screen. So on, checkout. It helps you create a new screen. Sign in, next, right? So this is how we want you to even design just enough so that you stick with the flow. So now let me do the same experience in Indigo. So let me fire up Indigo, and this is the default experience. All right. So you're seeing this recent projects. That's because I was mucking around. You guys will have a clean slate. You go to new, and it automatically selects a brand new design for new project. I say screen. And this is the first default view. What you see on the right are the usual suspects you see in any tools. Set a couple of elements and controls which you can actually add onto your surface. You can drag and drop. So for example, I can drag and drop a button, right? And then you also have what we call the elements and layers panel, which kind of shows any item which has been added. It shows up in this elements and layers panel. But for my common use case, I actually never drag stuff from the toolbox because there are only very specific amount of controls which I end up using. So we have this cool feature where you just alt click on the surface. And if I need a button, I just type in button and it shows up. I hit enter, button shows up. If I want a button of a specific size, I just do alt and drag. Same thing. I type in button, it gives me a button of that size. So this is the approach I will traditionally use in order to create the screen I was talking about. So let's create the shopping cart. I'm going to collapse the toolbox because I don't use it. All right. So for the shopping cart, what I'm going to first use is I just want to create a grid of products. So let's do that. And I'm going to use a cool control called the repeater. I just typed in repeater. And the first experience it asks is double click to add a template. So I'm going to create that core item which I'm going to repeat, right? I go in there and I do alt click. I type in icon. I just double click and I pick my Mac icon. There you go. I just resize it. Again, I do alt click and I'm going to type in a button and I call it add to cart. So in Indigo, you really don't need to double click or anything of that sort. As long as the element is selected, you can start typing right away, right? So this gives me my first item, right? I'm going to select these two, and either I can do group these or I can use the shortcut Control G. It groups that, and I'm just going to copy it and create a row of items. There you go. I'm not bothered about the alignment because I'm going to show you what I'm going to do. So I'm going to select all of these items, and under align, I just say align it to the baseline and then distribute the space evenly. I'm done, right? So what I have created here, create some spacing, is the core template. Now when I double click in the gray area to exit it, it adds it there. And now I'm going to select this, drag to duplicate this item, and it creates for me a grid of items. And I don't need like this box around it, so I'm just going to select the repeater and change it to no color. Right? There you have it. And now I'm going to create something for my shopping cart. So I'm doing all drag, and I'm going to create something called a container. And inside this container, I'm going to write in shopping cart. I'm going to add it to the container, and you see there's a drop target which shows up. I add it to shopping cart, and I say 0. Right? Now, if I want to be fancy, I can always add an icon. And if you haven't noticed, we provide a lot of icons by default. Usually, you should find what you need. So I'm going to search for cart. There you go. And I'm going to add that cart in there. There. Shopping cart. Right. So forgive me for being a little slow, but so the beauty of adding things to a container is that I don't actually have to group them. As long as they're inside the bounds of the container, if I drag it, it stays together. That saves me a lot of time. Now, if I want to just change how these items look, I'll just select that item, edit that group, pick a different icon. It replaces it, same size, same thing here. Let's get a Linux. I pick an icon. There, fine. Doesn't matter, right? So now I have designed my first screen. Now let me stick with the flow. What I want in my story is that the user is going to add the Mac product and the Windows product to the shopping cart, right? And I want to create the flow for that. So for that, I click Add to Cart. I select Add to Cart, say Add an interaction. When the user taps or clicks Add to Cart, and I can name this if I want. I can say Add to Cart Mac. What do you want to do? Do you want to change the screen or do you want to navigate to an entirely new screen? So for time being, assume that I want to create a state, right? So I'm going to say change the screen and I say create a new state. So the moment that happens, this mini navigator pops up. It confirms that a new state was just added. And if you look at the idea, it says tapped or clicked add to cart Mac. And if I hover over this navigator, I can switch between the two states I have. So right now, the two states are pretty much identical, right? I just created a new state, and what that does, it copies over everything you had in the previous state. Now I'm going to make changes to it. So since this item was added, I don't need this button, and I'm going to say added, right? There you go. And then let me just make it green for just for fun, so that it's more clear that was added. There you go. And in the shopping cart, now it will show one item. And now the shopping cart also lights up. I need a fill. There you go. So what has actually happened is now I have two states created. One is this one, which is all gray, and then this one, which says shopping cart is one item. Now let's add the Windows product also to the shopping cart. So I'm going to select add to cart. So I double click because it was a part of a group. I say add interaction, add to cart win. And I say change the screen. Same thing. I'm going to say new state. It says added tab to clock, tab clicked cart. Now I have the third state. And in this state, I'm going to change this to added. There you go. And then in the shopping cart, I say two items. That's cool. Now I want to explore the shopping cart, and that's the next interaction I want to add. I just select the shopping cart. I say add interaction. And right now it says container box, which is the default name. I say shopping cart. And I say change the screen. And same thing. I say new state. There you go. So that got a new state added. Oh, you see, I forgot to make that green. So let me just go back to that state, and I can do that anytime because it says designing in the transitions and animations timeline. It says designing changes from. I open that, select this guy, I make it green. There you go. And I can go back to where I was. There you go. Perfect, right? So in this state where I was trying to say when the user clicks the shopping cart, I wanted to expand. So I just go ahead and expand it, and I add that details. I say Mac product, and I give it a dollar value and a quantity there. And I create another copy of it, and I just say win product. So I don't need it this big, so I'll just resize it. So what I've actually done is that although you saw the mini navigator, now I'm going to expand it completely. So it had two states to it. So this was the mini navigator view, but if I expand it fully, now it shows you every state I have designed for this particular screen. So it starts with the start state, and this in this but second state I have the Mac product added, third state I have the Windows product added, and then in the fourth state I have the shopping cart expanded. At any point, you can actually run this prototype by hitting run screen. There you go. I could add to cart, show me shopping cart. Perfect, right? Now, let me show you how. Now, this is all state based. So, let me show you how I'll create a new screen, right? So, I'll go back to this one. Oh, this was not complete. I wanted to add one more button in here. So, I just do button and I call it checkout. So, I'm just going to peek at the GoToMeeting just to see if everybody's listening fine. I can't see it right now. So, I have checkout. And on the checkout, I want to do add an interaction. But this time, I'm going to do navigate. And in this case, I'll say screen in project. So in this project, which is not named right now, it just says project one, there's only one screen. But I want a new screen, which is the sign in page. And I say create. So when I create a new screen, it gives me a clean slate. And what that does is that I can now create, I just type in username, I create a text box, and then I create another one, say password. So this is a password and type in password. Pardon my spelling. And then I create a button by typing button and say sign in. Right? So let me just save this so that you can get that experience also. So I just do Control S. And it asks me to pick a project folder. So I'm going to do that. I go to that folder which it has it. I say new folder and I say shopping cart. I call it shopping. That's enough. I say create, open. And now you see it says save designs in shopping. And this is the sign in page. I say save. And this one I haven't saved, so let me save that. I just right clicked on the tab and I say save. And this one I'm going to do product page. And I say save. So you see that I kept with my story. I didn't even distract myself. I just kept going forward. And when I look at my state flow diagram, so I open it, this is our interactions explorer. You see the flow directly. It builds it on the fly as you're building the interactions. So from the start, you add to cart the Mac, add to cart Windows, tap to click the shopping cart, and from that page, you go into the sign in page, right? So I can actually click here, and that will select that tab. And just for fun, I'm going to do back, or let's say cancel, right? Sign in or cancel. And on cancel, I'm going to add an interaction which goes back to the previous screen. So I just say navigate the screen in project, and I say product page, right? So if I run this project, not this one, so I can run the whole prototype or just the screen. So I'm just going to do run the screen. And let me walk you through the quick story. I added a cart. I added the Windows product to the cart. I expanded the product, said checkout. It provides me a sign in page. I don't want to sign in. I cancel. It brings me back, right? So that's as simple as it is to do this interaction on the fly. And the idea behind that is the moment you're done creating your wireframes or your designs or sketches, you're pretty much done creating an interactive prototype also. The moment you hit run, it's already interactive. Now let's just add a little bit more fun to this mix. And I'm going to do two things. One, I'm going to introduce you to the animation stuff. And also, I'm going to talk about how do you create story branches without destroying the original story, right? So let's do that. I go back to the product page and I pick this guy, right? So any change I'm making to this interface is being recorded, or in this state is being recorded in what we call a timeline, right? So in this case, I have the item apple was changed, the color was changed. And if I want to gradually delay the color, I can just drag this out and it says the color would change from gray to green in zero point 0.4 seconds. Same thing with this container. I also set color on the container and the background. I can select both and just drag it out. And what that does, I hope it comes through clean. See, when I add to cart, it fades in, right? So I know this looks a little trivial, but when you actually apply these animations in the right time and with the right timing, it has the right effect for getting the experience of the prototype, right? Now let me go to the state where the shopping cart was expanded. So right here, here you go. So in this case, you see in this state, the major change I made was I added these items called Mac product 1 to 3, Win product 1 to 3, and I also resized the shopping cart. So I want to make it a little more fancy. So I just add a duration to that. And if I run the screen, you'll see add to cart with animation. The second one, it has no animation, so it happens immediately. When I open the shopping cart, you see it gradually slid open, right? So you can think about the possibilities based on your scenario as to when you would need such kind of animation. But what I really wanted to highlight was that how simple the animation framework is. In order for you to time things to happen, I'm sorry, in order for time it, you can just stagger those animations. You want the animations to start at different time, you can do that, no problem, right? Now let me talk about what I said, a story branch, right? For a story branch, I mean, this is not the primary flow. There is an additional flow, but it still leads to adding a product to the shopping cart. So for that, I'm just going to go to the first state I created. And in that, I say, when you click on this particular group, and let's call this group Mac products. I say add an interaction, change the screen to a new state, right? And in this new state, I'm going to do something interesting, right? I'm going to try to create something like a modal overlay. So I'm just going to alt drag right here, call it a rectangle, and make it a gray. dark gray, and add some transparency. So there you go. Then I'm going to reuse something what I showed you earlier, which is the container. I'm going to add a container, right? Now I want some content for this container, and instead of making you wait, I actually created it. So I'm just going to pull that up. I called it item details. So this was a screen I had created. So I'm just going to select everything here and just drag selecting, copy, go back to my shopping project, paste. Oops. I'm going to make sure that it's got actually added into the container or not. There you go. Right. And then I'm going to add an icon and look for a remove icon or a cancel icon. There you go. Right. And now I want to say that you could actually, if this was the Mac product, right, and I could change that. So in this case, I just put a default icon, and I used a repeater just like I showed you before, but this time it's just repeating horizontally, and I can double click to edit that repeater, and I want to change this icon to this Mac icon. So now you see it made changes to all the items because this was the source design element, and I had actually changed the colors on it, and it just does that on the fly. And when I say add to cart, I'm going to add an interaction. I say add an interaction, and I want to change the screen to something which I already have designed. So I'm going to pick existing state, and here I'm going to pick this one where the shopping cart shows one item. Done. And for this guy, the remove icon, make sure it's inside the container. I say add an interaction, and we have a simplified interaction which just talks about going back, and that's what I'm going to pick. I say go back. Right. So now let's add some animation also just for fun. So in this case, you see I got a rectangle was added, which was a gray one. I wanted to have a little duration to it, and a container box got added, same with the duration to it. But I want the overlay to show first, the dark gray to show first. So I'm going to stagger it, right? And I run. So there is always an interaction on the add to cart, which will add to the shopping cart, which we designed first. But if I click on the whole group, it shows my modal overlay. I say add to cart. There you go. It takes off where I left off. Now, when I show you the interactions explorer, what just happened is since I added two interactions on this particular screen, it just creates this smooth branch. Nothing in the original story got destroyed. And now I have another story. And this story is actually this gray rectangle you see here. It says switch to. What that actually means is that you're drawing the arrow back to this particular screen. So instead of drawing an arrow and making it look like spaghetti, we just left it linear. And as you see, it just says that when I hover over it, it highlights which particular screen it goes to. And then this is the back action, which is applied on the X on this particular screen. So I suppose you got a sense of how fluid this animation, interaction, and creation, right, with our alt click and stuff, makes it to create a simple prototype. And the green one signifies that it actually went to a different screen altogether, right? The another beauty of using a state, like you might be questioning, why should I use a state-based approach? It is almost like thinking like if the user is not actually leaving that page for any particular reason, things are just happening while they're looking at it, a state-based approach seems to make sense. As opposed to sign in, which I put it as a separate screen, that is because that's how I conceived it. If the sign in was supposed to be like a small modal, like on the page there was a little link called sign in, and you click on it and it shows a little dialogue with sign in information, then I might actually put it inside the state itself. The other advantage of doing state is the animation which was showing you. So when I collapse this, it's you see this timeline area which says designing changes from start to a tap click product. You get this benefit of getting real fine grained animations if you need to for doing state by state transition. And the third and the most important thing is an interesting one, and it's not easily apparent. Most of you who have used other tools might be wondering, where are my masters? And we say that masters are built into this product in a very novel way. And the way why we adopted this approach is because thinking about masters is actually very complicated and we don't think about it enough. Is that you don't know what is going to be reused till you actually run into the situation where you need to reuse it, right? So instead, what Indigo has is that every state preceding the state in focus is its master. So, for example, if I want some change to appear on all these subsequent states, all I need to do is that imagine I don't want the shopping cart to be green. I want it to be blue. I'm just making it up, right? I just go into that, I pick this icon, and I say, make it, I'm making it orange. Fine. Go to the shopping cart, same thing. I'm going to make it a light orange, and I'm going to change the stroke to a dark orange. There. Now, if I show you the Interactions Explorer, you see, every change I made to those elements have been shared with all the elements which precedes it. So even if I go here, there you go. In terms of why this is green, that is because we had changed its property in the second state. And if I want that to be orange, I just go in there, change it to orange. And if I show you the Explorer, bam, everything is now orange, right? So I don't want you to think that it creates such simple prototypes. I can show you something which we did using Indigo. And now that you have a sense of how the state flow and the screen states actually work, let me show you what I actually created for uh, a car maintenance app. Let me pull that out. So this is another prototype which we had created, and this one has all the animations and it uses 3 or 4 screens, and each screen there are multiple states, but it helps me communicate the experience of a car maintenance app which will help you repair a flat tire, right? So when something happens to your car, all you see is this alert on your app. You can actually add multiple cars to this particular app. It shows you fuel economy and all that stuff. But this car is particularly sad, so we can figure out what the sadness is for. Slides over, you see that something is wrong with the tire. I can check in my tire, and it says that I have a flat tire, and it shows me which tire it is. I can opt for either trying to change it myself, which most adventurous people try, and then I realized, oh God, that's got a lot of steps in it. So I could care less. So I'm going to close that out and I'm going to find a dealer. So locate a dealer and find this guy. Oh, they're open. So I give them a call, end the call, and there you have it. It's scheduled, and that's kind of an experience we would like our users to have when they use this app. So the one thing I haven't talked in much more detail, and that's only because if you have attended previous webinars, there's this whole notion of storyboarding, which is larger than this notion of creating screens and states. And what that actually does is that with a storyboard, it gives you a wide canvas. So in this storyboard, as you can see, I actually created some sketches, and I'll show you where my sketches are. So I created some sketches for my story just to get a sense of what the flow is going to be like. And I just drag them in and it creates what we call a story step. So let me just add that to the very end here. Right. And I can write a description for what this step is about. So let me just go in there, hit a flat tire. Right. But the point of the storyboard is a way for us to actually showcase what actually happens with the app in the larger context of the story. So in this case, I have actually designed. So if you look at the toolbox exclusive to the storyboard, there are 2 tabs in it. One says screens and one says scenes. Screens are what I designed. Just like I designed the shopping cart experience, I designed this for the car maintenance app. So as you can see, there is a screen called Alert DIY, and it has all these states in it. Then there's a screen called Completed Demo, and then all the states inside it. And at any point in time, I can drag a screen from here, right here, come into this scene and drop it, and it updates it in place. So let me remove that. Let me put this back in. And if I go to scenes, I can find something which has a phone in it. There you go. There's a couple of phone options. And I'm just looking for something which makes sense for my context. Well, I couldn't find it right away. Um, Never mind. So there you go. It's a two hand phone. I just drag it and drop it on top of the scene, and it updates it. So at any point in time, you can make changes to it. But the beauty of that is not that the fact that it can do this swapping. What it helps me do is that when I'm actually presenting my story, I can talk about the flat tire story and start off with the idea behind, oh, I hit a flat tire. I check out the app. And because these are apps, I have already designed these screens, I can hit run and it launches the prototype. And I can say, okay, the user will go ahead, locate a dealer and fix an appointment. And then I can go back to my story and finish off to the next part of the story where the app again comes in, right? So in this manner, I can actually understand how much do I actually have to design to support this particular story, right? So for the interest of time, I'm not going to go into more detail because I want to help summarize what I was just talking till now, and then basically maybe look at the questions you have. So let me go back to my slide. Okay. So what I was trying to tell you is that when you think about prototypes, think about it as a flow, as a story of use. And in that story of use, the user is progressing towards a specific goal, and that's the star I'm trying to show. You can totally have these branches which actually lead to the same goal in your prototype, and that's not a problem because you are unsure in your when you do your usability evaluation, you're unsure that what path the user would potentially take. There is a primary path, that's what we are putting our design weight behind, but there is this alternate path which we are curious about and we just leave it there. And that's okay because the prototype is still not corrupted. It has one goal, and that's the story which is taking place. You can totally have prototypes which do two goals, right? So in this case, there are two stars in there, and there are multiple ways, and there is also some crossover between some of the stories in gray and the primary story you have in place. But this is also okay. What you need to avoid, and you need to avoid it because if you ever plan to finish your prototypes soon enough and within the like for us the timeline for prototypes, I might be expecting too much of our design team here, is that spend maximum maybe 2 days or a day coming up with the prototype so that in the third day we can evaluate it quickly, even before we go into our engineering meetings to say, guys, this is what we found, this is the way we think it should work, and these are the tweaks we need to make. What you should not do is trying to make a prototype where everything looks like a hub. So every circle almost represents a screen, and then you start design for every element you added. You wonder, what if the user clicks on this, what if the user clicks on that? And that basically leads us into trying to put in too many goals into these prototypes, and these kind of prototypes make a very poor case for actually learning from observing users, because all you would learn is people went off the primary track. The goal you had was the one on the extreme right, and you found out people go in different directions, and this prototype is flawed because you'll never be done, right? The other element I wanted to talk about, which I didn't talk about in the storyboards in detail, is that you don't actually have to have every screen prototyped. You can have sketches, and like I'm showing here in the bottom left corner, where's my mouse cursor? There you go. So in the bottom left corner, you see that screen, which is pure sketch. This is one of my early ideas I had about the app, but I only finished a higher fidelity version of this one. And that's okay because that is the only portion I'm interested in. Everything else is just pure sketches, back to sketch, right? The second thing, which I think Indigo will help you do, is stay in the flow, right? So because I said flow is so important that we don't get distracted, we want to make sure that the tool actually helps you do that. So we do that in at least two ways. One, we keep it clean, right? So the tool is by itself, as I said, I don't use the toolbox, I collapse it only because I get more flexibility in terms of just having this open canvas, and I just do alt click all drag to add elements I need. And every verbiage we have, the call to action we have on elements, is primarily add an interaction. Because that's what we want you to think about, is that the next screen only happens when the user does something or wants to do something, because that sets the context for what you're going to design in this next screen. So as you can see, click the fan, add an interaction, and it's asking you, when the user taps or clicks the fan system, what do you want to do? And I can opt in for taking them to a new screen or to a different state of the same screen. And if you guys are not familiar with this, this is the, I believe it's Adobe Edge. I could be wrong. We wanted to keep the animation framework also very simple. So instead of giving you this, which will let you do a very complicated and detailed set of animations, we really wanted to talk about the synthesis between simplistic drawing, dirt simple animations, and smooth interactions, right? Or is it the other way around? Sorry. Um, we did not want you to present our users with this experience because this is distracting to what the interaction designer needs to do. And my final slide is prototypes. Think of it as user facing deliverables. Of all the things you create, you should remember that that is the only thing the user can actually give you feedback on. So try your best to think of it as prototypes. You first evaluate the prototype in use and then codify. Yes, you don't prototype everything. There is still room for wireframes, and that's okay. But try the prototype, understand what's happening, then codify. Try to humanize your prototypes with stories of use. And these stories come from real research. It's not things which I make up once upon a time. It's things I have learned from my interviews or from my document analysis or things I've looked at email conversations and I've realized this is what people do. And I'm going to extract a realistic story to be put inside my prototype. Once you have the stories, use the stories as a guide for prototyping. And then, as I showed you in the storyboard, create a collage to design just enough. And finally, think about it as fidelity of the experience and not of the prototype. And this is a larger topic, and I don't want to go into too much detail. All I would say, the fidelity discussion, it's not about how detailed your prototype is. The fidelity is more about what the user is able to react to, right? So, with that in mind, I'll end with a couple of the links we have put down there. One is for downloading Indigo Studio if you're interested, and I'm sure you're interested. Uh, Learning about it, and we have a couple of videos. So you can download it from Infogistics, or you have to go to Products, Indigo Studio, and you get that download option. We have both for Mac and Windows. All the ideas we have in the pipeline is available also publicly, is the indigostudio.uservoice.com. The link is there in the slide. And here you can see all the ideas people have been voting on for us, and we communicate whether we start, whether we have started on this product or not. So HTML5 viewer was hugely popular, and we have started work on it. We already have a beta, and trust me, you guys will find out soon. We also created some quick videos based on this webinar. If you go back and look at the videos, it is possible that it'll make better sense. And here I talk in more detail about storyboarding. So you should be able to figure out how storyboard was used to think about the app and how it evolved from storyboarding, it moved to wireframing. And that is why we have divided it up into these 6 parts. So that's pretty much I had planned for today, unless I'm now going to try and find your questions and see where I can take it from there. Does Indigo Studio support gestures? Yes, that's on a big plan for version 2, and very shortly you should be able to see. It comes with our iOS platform pack, so you'll be able to find out more about it when you go to indigostudio.uservoice.com. Gestures is a big part of what we think. Are there any other questions? Oh, wow, there's a lot of questions. How did you do that auto copy? I didn't do the auto copy, and if you're thinking about it as states, the moment I create a new state, it automatically copies over everything which was there in the previous states. What if the user decides to remove an item? It depends on your story. I'm thinking you're talking about the shopping cart experience where you want to remove an item. And if that is part of your real story that the user is going to remove stuff, you can design it. But the story is about moving forward. It's not about this retracing of paths. But if it's absolutely necessary, it's totally doable. What happens if you click on the Windows Add to Cart first? Will the shopping cart show? Okay. So there's a trick. I suppose I can show you. I did not design it such so that it does that, but I can totally have it. So let me collapse this. Wow. So if I want the shopping cart experience to happen first, then I'll just have it as a branch. So right here, I'll add an interaction, change the screen to a new state, and obviously there's nothing in here, so I'm just going to write empty, add some. Oops, that didn't take. Empty. There you go. Make it big and bold. So now if I show you the Interactions Explorer, you see from this state, now there are a couple of branches going around, but this is what you need to try and avoid as much as possible and keep it linear for your story's sake, because that's what you're trying to evaluate. If the person tries to hit empty, you can ask the user, what did you expect to see, right? Let me go back to the questions. I know we are almost out of time. There are more questions here, and I'll try my best to answer that at leisure. Um, what if can I bundle this and send it to the end user who does not have Indigo Studio? Absolutely. So for example, this is the screen I just finished creating. I'm just going to quickly save it, these two screens. So if I come to the project view, there is a view I did not show you before, and that is what you call a screen to screen navigation. So in this case, I know these two screens are connected, and I just click share prototype. And as you can see, it shows an option for asking which is the starting point for this app. I say it's this one. Click share. Here you get a link. You can just copy it or open it in the web browser. And if everything works, the prototype gods work, there you go. And in this player, you have certain options of showing or hiding interactive elements. So this works exactly the same way. So add to cart, shopping cart, and so on. Sorry, I trailed off in the end. Okay, what are the other questions? Any new questions? I'm going from top to down, so guys, I'll stick around for another 10 minutes, but if you guys are busy, feel free to head out. Um, how do you go to a particular state of a page? For example, from sign-in page to, oh, I can't see the entire, oh, wait. Sign-in page to page with shopping cart shows two items. Again, not a problem. Um, this is getting in my way. So I'm going to the sign-in page, and I'm just going to add a link and say uh, the state with two items, right? Just making it up. Add an interaction. Sorry. I said navigate to screen in project. And in here, there's a small little radio box here that says show screen interaction. I just select that. And that shows me all my states. And this is the one which had two items in it. I just select it, one click, and that's it. So when I run the screen, state with two items takes me to the one with two items. What else? Can you make your final prototype public so I can show the capabilities to my coworkers who are not on the call? Sure. This particular project, which I was just showing you, I'll upload it in a blog link and also have a way for you to get to this. How did you make sure it goes inside the container? When you drag the element on top of the container highlights itself into a dark gray, and that's when you know it's inside the container. And then when you try to move the container, the element will stay inside it. Of course, there is a little bit a different way of finding out. So for example, let me go to the one which has a container on it. So this one, right? So empty. You see when I'm dragging the empty, the box goes gray as opposed to white. That means it's inside the container. I can also verify by selecting the container. And if I look at my elements and layers, collapse all. And you see, this is the container shopping cart, and it has three elements in there. It has a shopping cart text, it has a checkout icon, and an empty text. Can you generate HTML or XAML from Indigo Screen Designs? Well, we are having a big web viewer which will let you run these prototypes on devices. But the goal there is to get it to be evaluated by users who don't have maybe Silverlight or something of that sort. But it's made the priority push is to have it as prototypes which are running as opposed to pure code. But if you look at our Indigo Studio user voice, please feel free to add additional comments. And our product manager has also added his comments as to what our direction is. Um, Deploying to actual devices. Well, this is what I was talking about. A beta version of HTML player is almost done, and you should be hearing about it shortly. Dante, I sincerely apologize. We are saying four screens like before. My bad. Will Indigo Studio output prototypes to Xcode? It has not been discussed, but I'm not going to bet on it in terms of whether this idea has been considered or not. So please feel free to check the user voice site. Thank you. Can we import our own icons? Not currently. We have tried to give you some 200 odd icons, but I know you have a very specialized need for some situations. But for now, we don't support it. But it's not something which we have thrown out of the, into our consideration. How do you share prototypes with others? I hope I had shown you where you go to the project home and you just hit share prototype and it gives you a link. HTML file allows us to export full prototype to a local environment, not needing to post an inflogistics. Oh, you'll be very happy that that's almost done, and you should be seeing that soon. A lot of concern about public network. Same question, so trust me, it's done. Great. All right, I think I have tried to answer most of the questions, but if there are any instructional stuff in here, I'll make sure that I capture it. All right. All right. Thank you guys. You've been a great audience. Later.